Hi, I'm Ali Hussain, creator of Entmorph, and in this series of videos, I want to introduce you to Entmorph components, which are the fundamental building blocks for creating almost anything on the Entmorph platform. Rather than explain what a component is up front, in each video we'll either create a component or build on an existing one from a previous video. As we proceed through each video, we'll explore different aspects of components, such as reactivity, styling, event handling, and much more. So you'll hopefully gain a good understanding of what a component is, and more importantly, how you can create one yourself. Before we begin, I'm going to make a bold claim, and that is that Entmorph will allow you to create anything you can create using similar tools, but in a fraction of the time and with significantly fewer errors. I ask you to keep this in mind as you watch the videos, and I'll provide evidence throughout each video to support this claim. In this video itself, we'll look at general features of Entmorph components and Entmorph itself, which will serve as a foundation for all the videos to follow. We'll specifically look at creating a project, using editors in general, and creating, building, and previewing components. I'm also going to put the browser into full screen by pressing F11 on my keyboard. We'll start by creating a new project. I've logged into my account on entmorph.com. From my home screen, I'll click on Create New Project. I'll give it the name, Components, Overview, and press Enter to create it. This loads an empty code editor. I'll scroll down to Namespace Commands, which contains commands that allow us to create what are called cells. A cell can contain data, an action, or a component. Data and actions are covered in dedicated videos, so here we'll just focus on components. I'll click on Add Component, which creates a new component cell. A cell has a number of sections. At the very top, it has an auto-generated ID, which allows us to refer to whatever we're creating in the cell from outside the cell. I'll click on it and rename it to Hello Component and press Enter to accept that. Below the ID are a set of controls which we can ignore for now. Then there's a code panel, which contains a component editor, which is where we'll create our components. Then below that, a Run panel, which contains a Build Component button, and at the very bottom of the component cell, there's an Output panel, which is empty to begin with. This is where we can preview our components as we build them. Now, rather than scroll up and down, from now on, I'll use the Goto menu where possible to navigate to where I need to get to. There should be a Goto menu accessible from most sections of the code editor, so if you can't see one at any point, you can scroll up or down a little to find the nearest one. I'll click on Goto and select Code to go back up to the code panel. One thing I should mention about the Goto menu is that it is context sensitive, meaning that the items available in the menu depend on where the menu is. So if I click on the Goto menu next to the code panel heading, which is within the cell, we have items for both the current cell and the code editor. If I close that and then click on the Goto menu next to input parameters, which is inside the component editor, we have all the items that are available within the cell Goto menu and additional items for navigating around the component editor. Now let's look at the component editor. There are a number of sections included by default, each of which lets you specify some aspect of the component. Just like functions, a component can have input parameters, which allow us to customize the behavior, appearance, and certain other aspects of the component. Let's add a parameter. To do so, I first have to open the Input Parameters editor, which I can do by clicking on the Edit icon next to the Input Parameters section heading. Whenever you see an edit icon, it means that you can open that section or editor for editing. When an editor is open, we usually see a close button, usually at the very top of the editor. We also see a set of commands for that editor. In this case, we have parameters commands. I'll add a single parameter. To do so, I'll click on Add Parameter. This adds a parameter editor, which allows us to create a parameter. One useful feature of this editor is that it only lets us create valid parameter names. For instance, if I start a parameter name with a number, it won't let me. The same for double quotes, ticks, commas, and any other illegal character. So each editor in Entmorph only allows us to specify legal values for that editor, which should help to reduce the chances of making mistakes. I'll type arg and press enter to close the editor. Once you finish working with an editor, it's a good idea to close it to keep the interface tidy. I'll also close the input parameters editor. Underneath the input parameters, we have component commands. Again, these are visible because the component editor is open for editing, as is also indicated by the close button next to the component editor heading. If I click on Add Section, there are more sections that we can add to the component, all of which we'll cover in subsequent videos. I'll close that for now. Below the component commands, there's the state section, which we'll cover in the next video. At the very bottom of the component editor is the render section, which is where we'll create the user interface for our components. We do this using a visual representation of HTML with a number of enhancements, which we'll cover as we go along. So we'll begin by creating a very simple user interface, which displays the parameter passed into the component. There's already a div element at its root, so I'll click on the edit icon next to it, which opens an HTML element editor. Notice the HTML element heading looks like a link. This means you can click on it to change the editor. Doing so opens an HTML child dropdown, allowing us to change the editor to one of the options listed. We want to keep the HTML element, so I'll just press cancel. The HTML element commands allow us to add attributes to an element. We'll do this in the next video. And below that is the Element Children panel, where we can add child elements. If I click on Add, this opens an HTML child dropdown, which we just saw a minute ago. This gives us a number of options, all of which we'll cover in this series of videos. For now, I'll click on Select ID, and from the Local IDs section of the dropdown, I'll select arg, which adds a reference to the arg parameter to the user interface. If I scroll up now, click on Go To and Code, and click on the Close button for the component editor. This also closes all the open editors within the component editor, and we can see our component design much more clearly. We've created a single input parameter called arg in the input parameters section, and we've added a reference to it in the render section. So now we're ready to build our component. I'll click on Go To, Run, which takes us to the Run panel of the component cell. I'll click on the Build Component button, and you'll see that now the output panel becomes populated with a number of items, including a test component panel. At the top of the panel is how the component would look if we want to include it in another component. It has an ID of hello component, which is what we set the cell ID to at the very beginning. Since we added a single input parameter, there's already a default value for that parameter of nil. Let's pass in something other than nil to our test component. If I click on nil, it opens a drop-down menu giving us a choice of items we can replace nil with. I'll select string, which opens a string editor. I'll enter hello, world, then press enter to close the editor. Now we're ready to preview our test component. So I'll click the Preview Component button, which populates the dashed area below with how the component will look to our users. And we see the string hello world. This isn't much of a component, but this has been more about showing you how to create a project, create a component within it, add input parameters to the component, and build and preview that component. There's one more useful feature I want to show you. Let's go back up to the code panel. Suppose we want to rename arg to something more meaningful. To do this, let's click on arg to edit it. As I rename arg, I want you to watch what happens to the reference to arg in the render section. As I delete each letter in the parameter editor, the reference to arg in the render section updates in real time. As I type greeting, both the original parameter and its reference are updated to greeting. I'll press enter to close the editor. So this automatic reference updating is a general feature of Entmorph editors. If you rename an ID, then all the references to that ID will automatically be updated. This works for all IDs, not just input parameters. The great thing about this is that you never have to perform a search and replace, like you would in a text editor, which should save you a lot of time as well as reduce errors. From just what we've covered in this video, I hope you're starting to gain a better understanding of how Entmorph components can transform the way you develop web applications. We've barely scratched the surface of Entmorph components, and there's a lot more to cover, including reactive user interfaces, styling components, flow control using special elements, event handling, and much more. To start using Entmorph now, you can create a free account by going to entmorph.com, clicking on Sign Up, and submitting your details. You can access more videos on the Entmorph YouTube channel, youtube.com/@entmorph. Please also share this video with anyone you think will benefit from using Entmorph. The component we created in this video is of course extremely boring, as it doesn't do anything at all. So, I hope you can join me for the next video where we'll look at how to create reactive user interfaces. Thanks a lot for watching.